Well, welcome to 10 Minute Record Reviews, episode 72, and today we're going to talk about the Bad Brains debut album, Bad Brains, which came out in 1982 on Reach Out International. It was never actually released on vinyl in the first place. It was released on cassette only, had a very limited distribution. So this is punk with a splash of reggae, splashed actually quite liberally through the album. Kind of an unusual combination, actually one shared with The Clash, although these guys frankly are a little more legitimate, having been actual Rastas as opposed to The Clash, who were basically Rasta fellow travelers. It's of course the classic Bad Brains lineup of HR on guitar and vocals, Dr. No on guitar, Daryl Jennifer on bass, and Earl Hudson on drums. So these guys started out of Washington, D.C. They have kind of eclectic musical history. They started as a jazz fusion group called Mind Power. They were heavily influenced by people like John McLaughlin, Chick Corea, and people like that in the early mid-70s. They were also heavy metal fans in addition to being jazz fusion fans, and they were into Black Sabbath. They got into punk in the mid-70s, saw a Ramones gig, named themselves after a Ramones song, Bad Brain, obviously. They also saw a Bob Marley tour around the same time, a little bit later. So out of this soup of reggae, heavy metal, jazz funk, and punk, their own musical identity forms towards the late 1970s. Punk, of course, started off being pretty attitudinal, but it also was not necessarily that distinct from early rock and roll. I mean, if you listen to some early Kinks records and you listen to the Sex Pistols or you listen to The Clash, there's not too much to choose in the actual playing of the instruments. That changes with bands like the Bad Brains, who start to play a lot faster, a lot thrashier, and of course the sound that emerges becomes known as hardcore. Part of the ethos of hardcore is that the music to play as well as to listen to is pretty much accessible to anybody. It was all about the speed and the attitude, and these guys had all that in spades. But what they had, which a lot of other players in this genre didn't have, was a lot of actual musical history and talent. So not only are they able to play way faster, they also mix reggae into their music, not into the hardcore songs, but they would intersperse the hardcore songs with reggae songs. And so about, I don't know, a quarter of the songs on here are reggae, the other three quarters are hardcore. Club owners in Washington, D.C. in the late 70s were not really ready for hardcore punk gigs or the scene that came with that. Unable to get gigs in DC, they relocate to New York, and they pretty quickly become regulars at CBGB, the club which had previously launched the careers of Blondie, Talking Heads, the Ramones, and this was recorded at a little club called 171A, where they also gigged all the time. And so about half the songs on here are recorded in that club, but mic'd up and managed like a studio, and the other half are recorded as part of a live gig at the same club. Just a shout out to the cover art, which is awesome. The other thing about it is that it's it clearly reflects that they had not yet gotten over their hurt feelings of being punted from DC. It's kind of hard to say, where hardcore actually started, because there are a lot of different places. I mean, my own take on it, which is not particularly expert, is that punk had made a big impression on small minorities of people in lots of different places across North America in the mid-late 70s. And you begin to get outcroppings of punk bands in LA, in Vancouver, on the East Coast, and a bunch of other different locations, somewhat simultaneously. I don't know if you can say that the Bad Brains, this was, this sort of broke the dam for hardcore, but this was one of the earliest and best flourishings of hardcore punk. It's been called by some the greatest hardcore album ever. I think there's a lot of competition for that, not least, right here in British Columbia. There are several bands who might lay claim to that, but this is clearly one of the great hardcore albums. So it starts off with Sailin' On, and right away, a whole bunch of things are evident when you hear this tune. These guys are not fucking around. They are seriously good musicians. They are playing seriously fast. This song has classic punk chord progressions. It's also got a wailing ass solo, not the last wailing ass solo on here, which was kind of unusual for punk. But I don't recall anybody back in the day ever giving these guys a hard time for playing solos, just because they were clearly so technically gifted as a band. So then the next song is Don't Need It, which is one of my favorite songs, even faster. This is serious hardcore, great song, another Wail and Ass solo, and then it kind of morphs into this song called Attitude, which is another song I really like. I wish it was more than a minute in length, but I guess, when in Rome, right? And then another minute-long song, The Regulator, which is about sticking it to the man, so that works. And then the song, I guess, which the cover refers to and which I mentioned earlier, Banned in DC, starts off really slowly, like as if Metallica were a punk band. It has that kind of a feel. It's got a great solo, which I really enjoy. And then we're into the first reggae song on the album, Jaw Calling. It's not just reggae, it's basically dub as well. I have to say that as much as I love their thrashy, speedy, hardcore playing, I also love reggae, and I'm never particularly persuaded by their reggae tunes. I mean, I appreciate that these guys are feeling it. These guys are all in, they're Rastas, fair enough. But they lack the quality, I think, relative to, other folks who are playing in that same genre. So they always feel a little bit to me, and this could be a little bit sacrilegious if you're a serious Bad Brains fan, like a little bit of a party trick. But there's another issue here, which is that the bargain basement production doesn't really work for reggae. It works really well for punk. In fact, punk is almost defined by bargain basement production, particularly hardcore. You sort of expect it. If it was really polished, it would be kind of weird. So I'm left a little bit cold by Jaw Calling. But that's okay, because we're back with hardcore again with a song which is kind of a combination song, Super Touch and Shit Fit. Super Touch is another great song about how the man is keeping the kids down. Can't have that. Then Shit Fit's got this great, I mentioned I think they were Sabbath fans. They has this great Sabbathy feel, particularly in the bridge. This track might actually be my favorite song on the album. It's really complex for a punk tune, and I'll take that complexity when I can get it. The final song on this breakneck first side of the album is Leaving Babylon, which, as you can probably guess from the title, is a reggae tune. And this one I think is actually executed a lot better. It's got a great bass line, and it has a really, almost like a Gil Scott-Heron conscious hip-hop kind of vibe to it. So side 2 starts with another minute-long thrash tune, Fearless Vampire Killers. And this one's got a pretty nifty riff at the outset, and then gets into some chords that remind me so much of the Exploited's Fuck the USA, but it's over too soon to really complete the comparison. But good tune. Then we're into an epic 2-minute long song called I. You'd think that would be another reggae tune given the title, but no. Hearing this tune in particular, you can tell how excellent the musicianship is underneath this onslaught. The band is seriously tight. Then we're into practically a rock opera at 2 minutes and 57 seconds, A Big Takeover, which is an anti-fascist tune, so contemporary for today. Then we're into one of the more famous songs that they put out, Pay to Come, and that's all about the bass line and playing fast, as far as I can ever tell. Then we're on to what I think is probably the last really good song on the album, which is Right Brigade. This one sounds quite a bit like The Clash to me. It's also got this great change up in the middle where there's this really nice sort of metal riffy section. You also get a Wail and Ass solo, and I can't get enough of those. Second last song on the album is a reggae tune, a really extended one actually, called I Love Jah, which clocks in at just a little bit under 7 minutes. In terms of style, it's a little bit dub, it's a little bit dance hall. When I listen to this, I understand why these guys are remembered for their punk tunes and not so much for the reggae tunes. It falls into the category of just okay. And then you have the cleverly titled intro, which is the very last song on the album, a hidden track, which would have been truly hidden on a cassette. It's harder to hide a hidden track on an LP. It's a reggae tune as well. It's better than the preceding one, but again, just okay. For me, I think, despite my ambivalence about the reggae hardcore combination, this is pretty much an indispensable album if you're looking at the history of hardcore and the most important contributions that were made. It was desperately sought and hard to get because of its original sort of very restricted release. It is played extremely well. The musicianship is uniformly excellent all the way through. These guys were better at punk than reggae, but the reggae does serve to break things up, which I guess is nice for old farts, although of course this was never ever, Music for Old Farts. Anyway, wonderful album, fantastic album, interesting album with a strange history, and if you haven't listened to it, so worth listening to even today.